Welcome back. This is Luca, and sometimes it happens that a manufacturer comes up with a piece of gear, in this specific case, a lens. And that lens ends up being the perfect match for your camera, even though probably that lens wasn't specifically designed for that camera. I guess this is exactly what happened with the 40mm f2 from TTArtisan that you see in my hands and the Nikon ZF. Because for several reasons, this lens seems to be a match made in heaven for the ZF. Now, don't get me wrong, the lens is not perfect. It's not perfect at all. It's got its own flaws, and we're going to talk about those. But overall, the compact size, the fact that it weighs only 166 grams, despite being entirely built of metal, the presence of the aperture ring, the very competitive price at $168 at launch, you're going to probably find it for less, especially when it's on sale. And last but not least, the very good image quality that you get out of this lens just seem to point to the fact that this lens seems to be a great choice for the Nikon ZF. Now, before we get any further, usual disclaimer. TTArtisan sent me this lens to test and review, and I get to keep it. But I'm not being paid, and they don't know anything about what I'm saying until I publish the video. With that out of the way, let me just walk you into my experience with this lens. I started using this lens with dog shooting. I was shooting friends' dogs because they're getting old and she wanted some memories of those dogs. And then I put it into a street photography session, and then I took it with me in a skiing trip as my only lens for the Nikon ZF. And I ended up using this lens a lot. Even on the ski courses, I bought the camera and the lens with me, and I took very nice pictures that I wouldn't have taken with the camera. I would have probably taken with my phone if I didn't have this combo over here. And there are a few reasons as to why I love the images that I was getting with this lens. First of all, I'm a 40mm lover. If you follow this channel, you know, if you know me, you know that to me, 40mm is perfect as a do-it-all lens. So this one falls exactly into that. So I'm kind of biased towards the focal length, but it's not just that. Its size made it so easy to carry around, even with the ZF, which is not a lightweight camera by any stretch of imagination. It made it a no-brainer to bring camera and lens with me instead of using the phone, for example. And the overall rendering of the images, the character of this lens, gave me a look that made me want to use the lens more and more and more. When it's used wide open, there's kind of a glow in the center of the image where you're probably going to frame your subject if you're shooting at f2. At f2, this glow, which is mostly given to you by a very visible vignetting, gives that image a peculiar look that it's not easy to find in any other lens. The background blur is smooth enough. It's not the smoothest in the world. Of course, you should not expect that from a lens that costs only $168, but it's very smooth and it's pleasing. Despite the lens being fairly sharp in the center, even wide open, as you kind of stop it down, the lens gives you a completely different character. The glow almost goes away, although it doesn't completely go away. We're going to talk about that later. But the lens becomes much more sharper, and it becomes a more regular lens, a more clinical lens, although it's not clinical. The colors on this lens are really good. I loved the skies that I was getting with this lens. I love the color, the overall rendering of the colors that I was getting with this lens. Chromatic aberrations are fairly well controlled. The sun stars are decent when you stop it down, and even at f16, the lens remains usable. The focus is relatively accurate. It's not perfect. We're going to talk about it later, but it's silent and relatively fast. So nothing to complain about the autofocus of the lens in general. Now, as I mentioned, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and this lens has some relatively visible flaws too, and we're going to talk about those. The most visible one is a vignetting that never goes away. You would expect vignetting when the lens is wide open, but you would also expect that as you stop it down, the vignetting goes away. This doesn't happen even if you stop it down, the vignette never goes away. This is probably a function of a very small barrel for the lens. I don't care much. I'm not going for perfect image rendering with a lens like this, but it's something that it's very visible. It's not relatively, it's very, very visible. You kind of see it all the time. And the lens is prone to flare, even with your hood on, and the hood is made of metal too. It's not just the lens, it's the lens and the hood. But even with the hood on, if the light is coming from the side of the camera or the right at the angle, the hood is not enough to protect the lens from flaring. And in a couple of cases, I had to use my hand outside of the frame to kind of shade the light getting into the lens. When it comes to the autofocusing, although I mentioned that it's silent, it's pretty fast, it happened that it missed a couple of times, unpredictably, for no apparent reason. I don't know if the Nikon lens would have done the same. I don't have a way to check that, but I just have to report that. And the lens has kind of a visible focus breathing, although I don't think this is a lens you're going to be using for video that much. If you do, just keep in mind that you get a relatively visible focus breathing. All in all, however, once you start considering the price and all the virtues that I mentioned before, there isn't much to complain about this lens. There isn't really almost anything to complain about this lens, to the point where, in my opinion, this becomes a better choice compared to the 40mm f2 from Nikon themselves, for a couple of reasons. In my opinion, this has got a little bit of a better image quality, aside from resistance to flare. For that, the Nikon version is a little bit better, but besides that, this one, in my opinion, is better. It's got more sharpness, wide open, especially at the close focusing distance, and it's got an overall sharper look to the image. This also means that the character that I mentioned in the review of the 40mm f2 is a little bit, that lens has a little bit more character than this TTArtisan, but at the end of the day, this is still a characterful lens. So between the two characters, I'd rather take this because I can exploit the character when I need it, but also get a better lens when I want it a little bit more clinical. And on top of everything else, not on top of everything else, but on top of all of that, this lens has an aperture ring. And to me, for a camera like the ZF, having an aperture ring is just spectacularly good because it gives you the exposure triangle at your fingertips even when the camera is off. That's the way I like to shoot. That's the way I've been used to shooting with my Fujis, and now almost with Sony, although Sony doesn't have these dials over here. But for me, the aperture ring is a very important feature in a lens. And I believe that this lens with the 75mm that I reviewed somewhere over here makes it a perfect combo for the ZF. That lens, the 75, is another spectacular lens, and that combo is just compact, lightweight, very high performance. However, in order for TTArtisan to get the 5 stars, in my opinion, they just need to come up with a 28mm f2. If they do that, if they give us a compact 28mm f2 with an aperture ring, with basically the same design cues of this lens over here, that will become the trifecta for prime shooters on a Nikon ZF system. That, to me, will be incredibly, incredibly nice to have. And so in conclusion, as you can tell, I kind of love this 40mm lens. I preferred it, as I mentioned several times, to the Nikon version of it, and I cannot recommend it enough. And this has nothing to do with the fact that I received this lens. What happened is that I sold, as I mentioned in another video, I sold my 40mm normal. I was looking for the SE version, the special edition version that would have matched the ZF looks better. In the meantime, I received this one, and I'm not even looking for the 40mm SE anymore. I have no reason to do that. So kudos to TTArtisan for coming up with something like that. hoping for a 28mm f2 from them. That is it for today. Ciao, and I'll see you in the next one.